And joining me now is Arizona Democratic Congressman Greg Stanton. He posted yesterday that he respected President Biden, but, quote, I think he got this one wrong. Congressman, in your post yesterday, you said that this case was not a politically motivated prosecution, I should say. It appears President Biden disagrees. So what's your response to the president?
Well, I think he agreed with me for months and months and months up until yesterday, which the president indicated over and over again that he would not pardon his son. And in fact, he indicated he supported the judicial process, even involving his son. Remember, his son was convicted by a jury of his peers. And in the tax case, he pled guilty. And I don't think there's any indication that the special counsel who was appointed to maintain the independence of the Department of Justice, the special counsel, was in any way motivated by politics. President Biden has said for years that he wants to maintain the independence of the Department of Justice, even in light of the attacks coming from the right, claiming that somehow the Department of Justice has been politicized. It's incredibly important for people in the highest levels of government to support the independence of the Department of Justice, to support the rule of law, and not to undermine it.
And to that point, I want to put up some of what Colorado Senator Michael Bennet just posted. He wrote that President Biden's decision put personal interest ahead of duty and further erodes Americans' faith that the justice system is fair and equal for all. I want to ask you if you agree on that, but I also want to ask you a separate point is that today, the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, she said that both things can be true, that the president can support and believe in the legal system, but he also called this a politically motivated prosecution. Can the president, can both those things be true?
I don't think there's evidence in this case that the special counsel who brought these felony charges against Hunter Biden, for which a jury of his peers found him guilty of, and brought the charges to which he pled guilty. I don't think there's any indication that the special counsel was motivated by politics. And I think Senator Bennet got it right. And as a member of Congress, I'm pretty angry because it's going to be incredibly important that political leaders of both parties stand up for the independence of the Department of Justice, stand up to these attacks suggesting that the Department of Justice has become politicized and needs to be dismantled, or the FBI needs to be dismantled. We need to stand up and fight for the independence of the Department of Justice, not to undermine it. And I think that's what unfortunately has happened in this case, where the president, after months and years of saying he would not pardon his son, has done exactly that.
And Congressman, some Democrats have come out and voiced their displeasure with what the president did. A lot of others have not. Are you disappointed that more Democrats haven't spoken out about this?
Well, I'll be getting on a flight back to Washington tomorrow. We're in session this week, so I think a lot of members may not utilize X or other social media platforms like I did last night, but they will be asked about it. And I think you're going to see a lot of other elected officials feeling the exact same way I do, which is we respect President Biden, we respect his term in office, but on this one, I think he just got it wrong and may in fact do longer term damage by suggesting that the special counsel engaged in politics in the prosecution of Hunter Biden. I think that could do some real long-term damage to the Department of Justice at a time when the Department of Justice needs people to stand up in defense of them and their independence.
Not just the Department of Justice, but also potentially Congress and your party. Do you anticipate that Republicans are just going to use this, that whenever Democrats question something that the Trump Justice Department does, will it now be harder to do your job?
Of course. The question answers itself. Of course, it becomes harder to do our job. But most importantly, we need the American people to have confidence in important institutions like the Department of Justice. President Biden, for years, has stood up for the independence of the Department of Justice. For years, has stood up to the Republican attacks, the right-wing attacks, suggesting that the Department of Justice is politicized. And in this case, there is no evidence that the special counsel who brought these felony charges against Hunter Biden were acting with politics in mind. And so it's at these critical moments that we need to stand up and defend the independence of the Department of Justice. And it's disappointing that the president chose this moment to take this action, which undermines that independence, suggests that there's politics at play when there really wasn't, and that does make it harder. But so I'm most focused in on the American people's confidence in the justice system, and I think what happened in the last 24 hours has hurt that.
Really briefly, Congressman, though, on a human level, as a father, would you have done anything differently?
Well, I mean, that's so incredibly difficult to say about whether I, as a father or any parent, would do the same thing for our child. I'm a policymaker, and so I have to look at this about what the implications are for the American people's confidence in our justice system, our confidence in trying to undermine or suggest that politics are at play when they aren't, and for the greater good of the justice system, for the greater good about what is clearly coming down with the President Trump making these choices for these incredibly important decisions, what is likely to come our way, attacks on our justice system. We need people to defend that system when it is worth defending. And I believe that the special counsel did not act with politics in mind.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.